January the 30th, 2000. And we're talking to Mom here in her upstairs, in her home, and we're going to ask her some questions and have her share some of her thoughts and ideas with us. Okay, Mom, just tell us where you were born, a little bit about your mom and your dad and your family.
Well, I was born in Washington, Utah, and was born in our home. Actually, it was our front room. I was born there, and I was the 10th child for my mom and the 13th child for my dad. And just a regular birth, everything went fine.
Okay, now your dad had come from where?
My dad had come from Kaltbronn, Switzerland. He had been converted to the gospel over there, he and his wife, and he had 9 children, and the missionary was supposed to have been from Rockville, Utah, Hershey, that converted him. And when they finally joined the church, and their people disowned them. They didn't want anything more to do with them. And so they decided that they didn't want to live there anymore. So they decided to sell everything and come to America, because some of their friends had joined the church and gone to northern Idaho. So they thought they would go there. But his wife had a sister that lived here in the United States. And she'd been over here one time previously and spent 2 years. So she knew the language a little bit.
And how many children did they come over with?
They came over with 9 children, and they came steerage. That was the lowest class on the...
Do you know how long it took them?
Yes, it took them 2 weeks. And one little girl, Verna, told me that, and my dad also told me that they got so sick they couldn't afford any better. They were in the lowest. She said, "Oh, Daddy, turn around, let's go home." And his wife was pregnant with twins coming over. She was pregnant to have twins. And she had the twins later, but she got 2 boys.
Okay, so they got over here, then they went...
Well, then they went and stayed with her sister for about a month. And I don't remember just where that was in the United States. And then they came on to Driggs and the Tetons, because the Muellers and other of their friends had already come there. And then my dad got a job in Sugar City. First, he and his older boys, and they worked there in the sugar factories for a while. And then my dad homesteaded 160 acres in the Teton, in Driggs and Victor, Idaho, in that area. And then they built a little home, and my half-sister told me that they got up before the sun came up and never went down, went to bed later after the sun went down. They worked constantly. And they built quite a nice home, and she said they never had to go outside to get wood. They always had it. He had it build a shed. They could get it from the inside and bring it in. And they had a cellar that they kept all their vegetables in. And then they all worked, when the kids got old enough, they worked for other farmers.
So your dad really was just a farmer when he was
just
there.
Just a farmer.
Kept his own family alive and sold some things.
Now you'll have to know that my dad was Catholic before he joined the church.
Mm-hmm.
And the missionaries told him that he had to quit his smoking. He smoked a pipe. And he said, okay. And they said, just quit and don't ever take it back. So he told me as a little girl that he took his pipe out to the barn and emptied it and put it on a ledge and never ever went back and saw it again.
Wow.
So
it's amazing. So
what was his occupation in Switzerland?
He was just a farmer, and he said their home was on such a high slant that they would have a pole into the ground, and they tied themselves with a rope into the pole to sickle the grass.
He was one of those farmers on the hill, like
his regular chalet. He also said his bedroom was in the loft. He went up a ladder, and he slept on straw. And he said he'd come down in the morning, and his mother tell him to wash his hands, face. He'd do it, and he said he'd stick his head in the wash basin and shake it. And I said, "Did you comb your hair?" And he said, "No, I had curly hair, and it didn't need to be combed."
Oh, so who was the baker in Switzerland? Was that
the baker
his father?
Belonged to my mom's parents.
Okay.
It was on my mom's side.
And where were they from, Mother?
They were from, where did you go? I can't remember the name of that place in Switzerland.
Not Zollikofen.
No, my dad was from
Appenzell.
Yeah,
Appenzell.
and that's where they
That's
were.
where they were from.
My dad was from Kaltbronn and Wattwell.
Okay.
And it was the most beautiful little place when I went to visit there. And you remember, Judy, the cemetery,
Uh-huh.
that's where it
Uh-huh.
was.
Yeah, I remember that.
And we took all those pictures of the tombstones.
But then Appenzell is just is a different area, but it's a
It's-
beautiful area too.
It was a beautiful area
So
too.
it's real
and that's where
pastoral.
they came from.
And her father, your mother's father was the baker,
My mother's,
grandpa.
no, my mother's, my grandma, mom's mother's people were the bakers.
Oh, okay.
The
What
the
was their name?
Stookies, Bauman.
Bauman,
The
okay.
Stookies were poor, just poor farmers too, and they came across.
But Bauman?
But Baumans were
the-
considered quite well off because they had a bakery. And then they came into America and they had money. And my mom used to tell me that when they came home from school, they'd pass Grandma Bauman's house. And they couldn't have cheese and some of the special things. They'd always stop at Grandma Bauman's house. She'd have a treat for them, something they never did get at home.
So Grandma Bauman, so your mother's family was a generation sooner converted to the gospel than your dad,
Well,
kind of.
yeah, a little sooner. My dad he had 9 children and he's converted.
Right, but your grandmother, your mother's mother was converted, right?
Yes, yeah.
That was the convert.
But they weren't married when they came over. They came over in two separate
Oh,
families.
they did.
Yeah.
And then they married.
Grandpa Stookie married Grandma Bauman.
Grandpa
over here.
Stookie married Grandma Bauman and they settled in Santa Clara.
Yeah.
And that grandma was born in Santa Clara,
Yeah,
Grandma Zahn.
Mom was born in Santa Clara.
Okay.
So
So I want you to tell us a few stories that Grandma Zahner, as I know her, Tobler Zahner, would tell stories after stories. And I want the comb story,
the what?
the
Oh,
comb story.
I tried to get her not to tell you kids that I thought it'd scare you. Well, with the other story that Mom used to tell that Gary loved was the Indians.
The Indians are a good story too.
Well, in Santa Clara, they had a co-op, like, and every day people would bring all their cows to a certain place, and then they had to take turns watching cows all day. Everybody's cows would come together, and they'd drive them in the hills above Santa Clara to eat. And when it was my grandpa's turn, my mom and her brother Johnny always had to do it. They would pack a lunch, their mother would for them, and they'd take the cows, and they could not bring the cows home till they saw the sun starting to set in the west. And then they'd round up all the cows and drive them back into Santa Clara, and people would be there and take their cows to their corrals.
Mhm.
Well, Grandma always made a lunch for Mom and Uncle Johnny, and they would play around, just keep track of the cows wandered a little, they'd go bring them back, and it's the only shade they had, she said, was creosote bushes, things like that. The sand was red and hot, and they played in it, but the Paiute Indians, lived right, weren't they the Paiutes?
Chibwitz?
Shivwitz?
Chibwitz. They lived close to Santa Clara, and oftentimes Mom had seen them come and knock on the door, and Grandma would give them, sometimes she'd make several loaves of bread, give it to them. They never did turn the Indians away, they were afraid of them. So Grandma made a lunch for Mom and Uncle Johnny, and so when they saw Indians coming one day, they just thought, well, this is the thing to do. They went and got their lunch under a bush, and came over and handed it to the Indians, and they said something in Indian and took off. And so all day they herded the cows without their lunch, but they were afraid of them, and that's how they.
That kind of made him happy. And
Yeah,
appeased them.
and he said, Brigham Young said, or one of them, it's better to
Jacob
feed them.
Hamblin.
Jacob Hamlin, not fight them, feed them. And sometimes great grandma said she would give them a whole, like 7 or 8 loaves of bread. She'd just be through baking. And she said they seemed to sense the day she baked bread, because they'd always come and want
Yeah.
food. So
tell us about your
well,
mom.
my mom was had a second sense or a talent for taking care of sick people. And from the time she was a older girl, she just knew what to do. And so when her grandma, Stookie, was very sick, her dad sent her down to sit with her, different times during the week. And one time as she went down, she said, Barbara, go get out of my jacket and get this. I've got something there. And Mom went and got it, and it was a $20 gold piece. And she handed it to her grandma, and she said, take this to your father and tell him to take it to the temple tomorrow. So Mom said she did. So off and on, Mom took her turn down there to sit with her grandma. They just had to sit with them till they died. And so she said, then her dad was with his mother when she died, and then they came back down to see how she was, and she had died. And so he said to her, Barbara, you go and get someone to come and lay your grandma out, we've gotta have help. So she went down the street and she had a friend with her, and they went to, and I don't remember the lady they went after to go, to come and help take care of her body after she died. And when they, on their way back, they looked up and the house was just brilliant, like it, they didn't have any electricity, they just had lamps. The house was just brilliant and it scared them. So she said they turned and went down the street, and Tolbert's house was quite close, and so there was a lot of boys that lived there, and so she said, let's go and see when those boys will walk up the house with us. So they knocked on the door, and this Albert Tolbert said, yeah, he'd walk up with them. So he came out and they started walking up, and there was no lights. There was not the lights they'd seen, there was none. But he walked out with them up there, and then they told their dad what they'd seen and the people that were there. And so of course they said to them, it was your grandma's spirit. It was she was such a good woman. She lighted the house up like that.
Mhm.
So anyway, but when she was really sick, and my mom would comb her hair. Now, you remember Mom having a lot of hair,
Long
a lot
hair,
of black hair, and she'd go like this and turn it down and comb it and brush it and then bob it on top. And she said they were combing her hair, and they set the comb on a little desk or table there, and the comb jumped up off the table. And the older people told them it was evil spirits.
Hmm.
Mom used to tell this to my kids, and I didn't want her to.
But we
I was afraid it
remember
would
it.
scare him. I was afraid it would scare him. But Gary was the worst. He just hounded her to tell that
Yeah.
story. So,
Well, tell us about Grandma. She took care of all the people all the time, you said. She was
well,
always
my mom did that until she got married, and then she got married, and they moved to Washington, and then
She
that big-
married Tobler.
she married Albert Tolbert, and there was the big cotton gin there, the factory, and
Mhm.
they were raising cotton, and people from everywhere brought their cotton in, and then they would get material, take home material. And so Mom said when the people from Santa Clara would come over, it took them a long time by team to come. They would come to, a lot of their friends would come and put their teams in their corral and let them have water and food, and then Mom would have them for dinner. Then they'd go down and trade their stuff and get muslin and all this thing. She told me how many yards of muslin she got for her trousseau, and have to make 7 pairs of pillowcases and I don't know, linings for quilts and everything. And anyway, she said that it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and they worked hard. They got more property. They bought more lots and more lots, and then her husband started to. She had children one by one. She had these children. Started out with the girl and had 3 girls. Then she got 2 boys, and then she had another girl, and then she had a boy, and then she had another girl. Thora was the last girl
Mhm.
she had. And so then she said, Vera and Ella, after their father died, he was a peddler. They called him a peddler. He'd take produce to Pioche and out in that area, and he would sell it. And he wouldn't always sell it for money. He'd bring back honey. He'd bring back little pigs. He'd bring back trade things for their produce. And that's what he did. And when my mom's first baby was to be born, he was on a trip to Pioche, and so she was there by herself. So one of the neighbors said, come over to my house. And Mom went over there, and she delivered her baby at Aunt Mary's house, Aunt Mary Tolbert's. So anyway, she had all these children. And one time when he came home, he was very sick with a bad cold. And so Mom, being very apt at nursing and helped people all the time, she put him right to bed and started doctoring mustard plasters and all these things that they used to do for us. And he didn't seem to get better, so finally they had to call a doctor. And you didn't call a doctor unless you're on death's row. And so they called a doctor, and he came over, and he said, oh, his pneumonia was bad, and he didn't think that he would live. And of course Mom just sat with him and did all she knew, but he did die.
That was before they had antibiotics or anything.
Oh yeah, no antibiotics.
Just had to fight it on their own.
But this is another thing that's interesting that Mom used to tell too, and I think that's really true. It seemed like it was, you can hardly believe it now, and I can hardly believe it when Mom told me, but I think they used to have these dreams and things. They needed them because they were in such bad trouble. She says she dreamed the night that she saw a set of temple clothes for an adult on her bed, and another set for a little white clothes for a little child. And when she didn't like that dream. She felt like somebody was going to die because there was the temple clothes. Well, he did die, and then she lost her little girl, the little Carrie, that was 2 years old, because Mom said she never was healthy like the other kids. She'd give her what they call Scotch emulsion to build her up. So Mom believed in dreams a lot. She's a lot like Aunt Vera.
Mhm.
She believed in dreams and she worried about things like that. So then my mom lost her husband,
How
And
old
the-
was he, Mom?
about 40 years old.
When he died?
Uh-huh. She had the 9 kids.
It's just like
Thora
Debbie.
was 6 months old.
Yeah, it's just like Debbie and Dave's age. You know, that's just amazing.
And because see, she married my dad when she was 44.
So she went for 4 years without.
So I thought 6 years, she told me, so maybe she's only 38 years
yeah.
old. But anyway, he died, and then Mom was a terrific worker anyway, and had a sense of people that were sick and knew what to do. So Mom just got in and did her gardening, and when her father could come from Santa Clara, he would come over, and he would plow her ground for her, and then she put it in vegetables, and she would sell those vegetables. And then she took in washings, and my mom took in ironings. She did everything to take care of her family. And then she'd go occasionally, she'd get a chance to go to Santa Clara to see her parents on Sunday. Uncle Will and Aunt Mary would ask her if she'd like to ride over. And with this one Sunday, she was visiting Aunt Mary and with her parents. And this man came to the door and knocked on the door, and my grandma Stookie said, "Oh, there's that Swiss man." And Mom said, "What Swiss man?" They said, "Oh, he's the man that lives up in Idaho, and he's got rheumatism real bad, and he's down here trying to get rid of it in this warmer climate and low elevation." So he come in, and they introduced him to my mother and said, "This is our daughter. She's a widow. She's had this many children," and on and on told him. And so Mom could speak German too, see, and so could the parents could. They all spoke German.
Mhm.
So Mom could go right in the conversation. So then he said to her when she's ready to go, he said, "You need any work done around your place? I come over and trim your grapevines and your trees." And Mom said, "Oh, she's doing pretty good." He said, "Well," anyway, he showed up in a few days over to Washington, and he was trimming Mom's grapevines and things like that, and he started coming more often, and he could see a real worth in my mother. Now, I have to tell you about my dad. My older brothers and sisters on my dad's side told me he was a very headset, strong-willed man. And they fussed a lot and said, "Oh, Dad this and Dad that." And they would say mean things about him, and it would make me feel bad. But I found out he was strong-willed, and and my mom was the one that always gave in. But he was strong-willed, but if he hadn't been strong-willed, he'd have never left that country and come over here and take that to church. But anyway, he was strong-willed, and when I remember when he'd tell my brothers to do something, they'd say to him, "No, we don't have to, you're not our dad." And I can also remember when my dad at church would bless the sacrament, and he'd bless it in German, and all my friends would laugh and titter, and I was embarrassed instead of being proud, but they used to laugh at people and they didn't speak the same language. So whenever they'd ask him to give the opening prayer, I'd just sit there and tremble, think the kids are all going to laugh. Well, they did. But anyway, that's the way it went. And my dad loved to dance. My dad was a good dancer. And when they go to dances, Mom would dance with him if it was a slow dance. But if it was, what did they call it, the schottisch or something, it was a fast one, he'd go get Caddy Nielsen. She loved to dance with him because he danced fast. I just remember Mom saying, "You go get Caddy." She told me, I won't dance that fast dance with you. So anyway, that's kind of what they did. And then my dad he was 12 years older than Mom. He started taking life more easy and laying down in the afternoon. I remember going in the front room and he'd be on the parlor floor with a pillow under his head resting, and Mom would be out working and Dad would be in there resting. And he was 12 years older, but he'd had a hard life, I know, but he just didn't have the ambition that my mom had.
Mhm.
He was just, but he was very, very good to me. Now the older brothers and sisters would say, "Oh, he was mean, and they said mean things about my dad." But he was strong-willed, and he did make him work hard. But when I came, he had mellowed. He was so sweet to me, and of course I went to school and I did all the things that my dad wanted me to, and he was older and mellowed, and he just thought I was about perfect. But when I talked to my half-brothers and sisters, they'd say he was strong-willed, he was mean to us, he did this and that and the other. Then I'd get mad at them. In fact, one time when we went up to Idaho, you remember, that one half sister called him the old man,
Mhm.
and it made me feel bad because to me, he was my dad, and I loved him.
Well, and don't you think he was in a different season of his life?
He
with
was
you?
complete
wasn't-
different
yeah,
season.
Yeah.
He'd mellowed down, and he didn't try to argue with people like he had previously, and so the kids can just remember him as a taskmaster, making him work hard.
Was he good to your mother?
He was good to my mom, and he told me many times, "You've got such a good mother. You have got a wonderful mother." He'd tell me
And
that.
she called him Brother Zahner, right?
She
Mom?
called him Brother Zahner.
And did he call her Sister Zahner?
No, he called her Ma.
Ma.
Uh-huh. He
Okay.
called her Ma, but he never complained. Mom was a good cook, but sometimes she's so busy, she didn't always cook as much as she would. And my dad didn't complain. Ever did I hear my dad complain about the food? Never. And but like I say, my mom was a good cook, but she sometimes would be out helping sick people and couldn't be home. Well, my dad would put the posting thing on the stove and warm it, get some bread and butter and jam, and he'd eat it, and
Exactly.
that's all he needed to do. He never complained, you know.
Yeah.
And so Mom would be gone a lot for sick people, and I can remember as a little girl lying there and hear a knock on the door to wake me. They knock real loud, and Mom would say, "Yes, who's there?" "Well, so-and-so said, Sister Zahner, we've got a very sick child. We wonder if you could come right up and help us." I could hear her say, "I'll be right there." She'd jump out of bed, get dressed. Sometimes they'd have a car, sometimes they didn't have cars. And my mom would walk the whole length of town to take care of those kids. And then the morning had come, we didn't have a mother. We'd get up and get ready for school. Mom would be there. We'd come home at noon. We didn't have a mother. Mom would sometimes stay the whole night, the whole day, because the child was sick, or the mother, or whoever she's helping. Then she'd come home at that night to have a bath and to see how we were. And I remember,
How old were you then, though?
oh, Thor was still in elementary school. I
Hmm.
was in elementary school. We were both going.
So your older brothers and sisters kind of took care of you?
Well, they had kind of gone. There's just me and Thora. My dad kind of took care of us.
Okay.
One time we came home at noon, and he was trying to cook for us, and he was he peeled the potatoes, and he was washing them in the thing that we washed our hands in. And we told him, "We won't eat those potatoes." I can remember me and Thora really saying,
Yeah.
he said, "They're clean, I washed." We said, "Yeah, but you washed them in the wash basin that we wash your hands in." But he tried to take good care of us. And then when Mom would go to Hurricane to take care of my older sisters, every grandchild she brought into this world, except the last few the last one I think that I had, and Carol.
Oh, is that right?
Mom brought all the rest of her grandchildren into the world with the
Oh,
doctor.
wow.
And we would be so glad when Mom come home. But me and Thora, we let the cereal cook, and it'd get hard, and we'd pour water in it, and then pretty soon we'd have all the pans dirty. We had a ditch that ran.
Are you
back
saying
up.
you never did the dishes?
Oh yeah, we did them, and my dad did them
How many
sometimes.
pans?
But they were be hard. It's that wheat that you grind, and
Uh-huh.
so Thora and I'd hurry and sneak out. There was a ditch where the water ran by all the time. But all those pans in the ditch so they could soak. I remember Mom come home one day, weren't expecting her from Hurricane, when she wondered where all her cooking dishes were.
We were all in the...
They were all in the back of the house in this ditch, soaking.
Oh,
So
dear.
that was kind of, well, we had lots of fun.
I remember wash days up at Washington when I went with you for wash days. When we
The Maytag, yeah.
Well, it was the ringer washer, and
Yeah.
you boil the stuff on a fire outside.
Yeah, we had a big
That-
black
That
tub.
place between Aunt Thora's and Aunt
Lula's,
Lula's, and
uh-huh.
I remember that distinctly.
Yeah, and Mom would take the sheets out and put them in there and boil them with the lye. And I can remember watching Mom make soap in that tub and telling us to stand back when she put the lye in and bubble all up, and then cook that and then let it cool, and then she'd cut it up. And that was the soap she used to wash our clothes.
Mm.
And another thing, you've never tasted the pies that my mom, crackling pies. They would render the lard with the pigs, We always had plenty of pigs and cows and things. And then there'd be that residue, or the cracklings we call them. And my mom wouldn't waste anything. After she'd get the buckets full of lard, she'd take those cracklings in her rolling pin, and she'd roll them till they were just almost,
Paper thin.
till they were just, there once in a while you'd find a little kernel. Then she'd use that to make pie crust.
Oh.
And let me tell you, if you bit into one of those, it was good, because once in a while you get just a regular piece of, no wonder I've got high cholesterol now,
Uh-huh.
because they were really good. We
I'll
call them.
bet they were.
Yeah, they were very good. And they had to learn to do things with what they had. It was just,
Did your mom ever have any church jobs, Mom? Do you
Mom was the
remember?
Relief Society president,
Okay.
and I think now, and she was also in the Relief Society presidency. I spent more time under the quilt in that little Relief Society hall playing paper dolls while they were quilting. Day after day they'd go down there and quilt. I can remember going down and playing, and my mom would beat those old rugs. You know, they had those rugs and straw under them, and they'd beat them to get the stuff
The
out.
rugs, so that they were made out of piece rugs, like
Well, no,
braided rugs?
they were like braided, but it was a machine that braided them. It wasn't like this. Sister, what's her name, braided them, and then they'd have to beat them, and they'd sprinkle them so the dust wouldn't get bad. Then I remember those windows, stand there and wash those windows, and of course I had to go everywhere she went. And I'll tell you what my mom did on Sunday. She'd say, you know, we always had our best dinner on Sunday. She'd always bake some dessert, only time we had dessert. Then she'd say after church, come on, Neola, go with me. We're going to go see Sister Hofer, or we're going to go see Sister Tanner. And she would take some of the dessert we had, and we would go to visit these two old ladies. They were immigrants too, and Mom would always take food to them. Now, you know, now they take dinners, but they were doing it then. But it was just like a dessert or a soup Mom would take.
Mm-hmm.
And I went with her, and one of them had the cutest clock that Hansel and Gretel would come out on good days. The old witch would come out when it was stormy, and I just loved to go to see that clock.
I saw some like that in Switzerland this year.
Uh-huh. Well, they had those. But my mom was, well, and then, like I should say, she'd come home, and I'd say, well, Mom, what's happened? She said, well, they died. And I said, oh, they did. And then when we'd go to school, we'd go past the Relief Study Hall, and there would be a big board covered with white oilcloth, and then they called horses. And we knew somebody died because they'd lay them out on that board. You know, we'd have a mortuary. And so we'd go to school, and they'd say, Neola, who died? And I said, I don't know. My mom wasn't home. Well, they said, because Mom would always know, because she'd be the one who'd be there with them until they died. And so that's what, and she would lay them out, and I'd question her, and I said, Mom, what do you do? How do you do that? And she gave me the whole thing, what she did, how she used a thing with the cotton, and closed every entry from their, coming out of their bodies, and then they would put ice bags on them. All day long, they'd have to sit and keep putting ice so that they wouldn't deteriorate till the funeral.
They didn't embalm them, they just took up the orifices and
That's
kept
all.
them cold.
And she wasn't afraid to do anything like that. She did it. She kept them. And one woman, Irma Iverson, lived about a block from us, and every time a child would get sick with a fever, she'd come down and get Mom. We got so mad at Irma because we thought she could take care of that, but she was always there. And twice Mom was in spinal meningitis cases, and the doctor told her, you get over to my office and get a shot. And one of them was Merle Thane, and the other was Foss Nice, and both had spinal meningitis, and Mom was with them. Mom got a shot. She never got it. I'll see what to do that.
Wait.
It's okay.
Okay. We were talking before. You wanted to say a few more things about your mother? You said you wanted to say any more about her?
Well, only the fact that she was such a great person. I mean, she did for everybody. Never come home and ever said she was tired. Never come home and went to bed after she'd been up all night helping other people. Never complained about anything. And I wondered quite often why some of my sisters were so nervous, and like Aunt Lula, for instance. Because Mom would stay with these sick people and doctor them and take care of them. Then she would be the mortuary with them. And I wondered how she ever could handle that. But she did, and she never talked about it to us unless I asked her questions.
And didn't she seem to handle most things in her stride, or did
Very
she?
good, very
Did
good.
you ever see her? Was she afraid of anything, or?
I've never seen my mom afraid. And when she used to water, my dad, he was 12 years older, and Mom was the ambitious one of the two. My dad was older, but he took life much easier. And the watering, it would come in the middle of the night, and my mom would set the alarm and go, and we'd say, wake us up, Mom. And we didn't want her to go alone. And well, she said she would, but she never did. And she went a block or 2 blocks up the street and tried to, and the water was in the big ditch coming out, tried to jump it and fell right in the middle of this pond of water. I was just, quite young, and she come home just dripping wet in the middle of the night. and had to change her clothes. And the funny part was, see, they didn't have a lot of underwear like we do, and she didn't have any clean, fresh underwear to wear. And she was doing the washing for Bowman, a little Bowman man. She washed for him, so she had his clothes all clean and folded. So she got a pair of his garments and put them on. And she told us that story, and we used to just laugh and laugh. Well, we slept through it all. She did it all, you know.
Yeah.
Never complained, just never complained. And you know,
This was before you had anything like cars or.
we didn't have any car. Well, yeah, Mom had a car quite soon after, because when her husband died, she loaned the money to his half brother. It was $1,000 life insurance policy, and he promised to give her 5% interest. And she thought, well, that's one way to make a little extra money. He never paid her anything, and it went on for several years. Finally, she kept asking him, and he didn't pay her. His name is Tober, too.
Mm-hmm.
And so she went to a man in Hurricane that had a car dealership, and asked him if they would take a note, the note she had on him for a car, and they did. And that's how she finally got the money, was through buying a new car. And it pleased Arch and Ern no end. They were in the age when they could drive. Mom never did drive the car.
Oh, she didn't?
Oh, no. But the boys could, and they were just, you know, in that age of sporting, and it was more or less but then they took her wherever she had to go.
Yeah.
But it was a fun car for them. And I think I told you about the night that Mom had heard, that's my train going around.
Oh, okay.
Mom had heard they were having a party down at the factory, and Ern was gone, and I don't know how she got the word, but either someone told her he was down there, or she thought he was. And so she came and got me out of bed, because says, get dressed, Neola, I want you to go with me. And I got dressed, little girl, hold my hand, we went down through our lots and across the road, down into where the factory was, and the lights was on, and you could hear laughter, and, you know, having a rough party in there with liquor.
Mm-hmm.
Mom knocked on the door, and they came to the door, and she says, is Ernest Tober in there? And she said, Ern came out so fast. She says, let's go home, Ern. And he went home with me and Mom. Now, I just remember little incidents like that, where my mom would get up and go after the kids. If we were out late, the light would go on at 12 o'clock. If we were sitting in the car out front, Walter and I, or, you know, the light would go on, and that was the signal, it's time to come in. If you don't come in, I'm going to get dressed and come out. So when our lights would go on in the house, they'd say, well, we've got to go in. And I mean, that was her signal.
It's a good signal.
But she wanted good kids, and she tried with all her might to have good kids.
Oh, yeah. Well, she had good kids.
She had good kids, but she more or less did it by herself, because my dad, he didn't care a lot. And besides that, the boys would say when he'd ask them to do things, you're not my dad, we don't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it made a little
Schism between
and still
them.
they liked him and they respected him, but they didn't want him telling them what to do.
Yeah.
So Mom had the whole responsibility.
Now tell us about your growing up and how you went to where you went to school into BYU, and then.
Oh, well,
Dad-
I went to
Dad
school
came
in Washington, and it was a 4-room school, and the teachers that taught there, they taught all my brothers and sisters before me, the upper grades, Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Iverson. The lower grades was girls from St. George, and I can remember a lot of the names of those teachers. They were wonderful. And then we finally went to, I went to school there. We used to have lots of plays. We had a big gym on the back of the school, the 4-room school, and that's where they'd have their dances. That's where we'd put on plays through the year. Used to be a lot of plays in my day, in the MIA and in school.
Well, I remember going there. It was still there when I was a young girl.
Yeah.
Because we'd go there for those. We'd go have taverns and eat and
Yeah.
have fun times at night. They'd show movies there.
Uh-huh. But anyway, that's where we had our golden green balls and things like that too. So it was a fun, lots of fun. Now I tell you, I might cry telling you this, but it's hard to tell. When I was born, I had a birthmark on my nose, and the kids they liked me. Because I was smart in school, but they would call me Cherry Nose, because it looked like a little cherry pit, is what it looked like.
Oh.
And I'd come home crying, I remember, lots of times. But what a great mother I had. She'd sit me down and say, well now, Neola, you're the smartest girl in that room. You've got a lot of things those other girls don't have. She told me that over and over again. And that's how it built my ego.
What happened to your nose?
I was born with that.
I know, but how many?
Oh, so then Mom, of course, Mom wanted to have it taken care of. And so she took me over to Dr. McGregor, and he said, we can take that out. And so they skinned it back and took out the little, it was just like a little cherry pit. And then he took out too much, and made an indentation. But at least it was okay. It looked a lot better.
Yeah.
And it pleased Mom. Then quite a few years later, when I got to be in my teenage years, crazy thing started to come back. And the thing they took out had little veins in it, just like a little growth. Just, he said it was there from birth.
Birth defect.
Yeah. And so then they told Mom she should take me up to Dr. Cowan. So Mom brought me up to Mom didn't come, but Archonitha did. Took me to Mom came the first time too. And he was a cancer man. And he peeled that out again, just peeled it out like a little, it reminded me of a little egg we used to get out of the chickens when Mom would clean the chickens. And he said, well now, everything's fine. It was there, and it was all through her growing in birth, it was there. Everything's fine. And everything did, and he did quite a bit, did more for me. But then we went on, and everything was fine. And because I worked hard in school and was good, I was able to throw that thing off because of my mom. Kept saying, she kept pointing up the things I was good in. And so then I had no more problem with that until, you remember when Dad brought me up here for surgery? And I came back up here again for surgery, and this guy told me that when he looked at it that he was going with the Air Force or something. Well, anyway, he was going for 3 weeks, and could come back and they would operate. And so in 3 weeks, Dad brought me back up here, and they operated on me in Holy Cross, and it was a 5-hour surgery. Well, what was happening, my nose was widening up here, widening out, and it was a growth in the bone, not only on the end of my nose, but the growth was in the bone. And so they chipped it all out, got it out, and he told me, he said, I'm real sorry that we can't make you a nicer nose than that, but he says it's so close to the sinuses. I could shape your nose up, but you're going to have one side of your nose that's going to be different than the other side. And so he said, so then anyway, I went back to Las Vegas, and was there and everything. Then when I came back up here again, one time Aunt Leona said to me, Neola, she says, I'm going to a real good doctor out in Cottonwood. And she said, I don't even remember, was it Bishop? She says, he's real good. She said, I bet he could do something for you. And so I got an appointment and went to him, and he said, oh, you don't have to go that way the rest of your life. He says, I can straighten it, fix that nose for you. And so he did. He chipped at it, fixed so both sides were even.
He was a plastic surgeon.
Yeah, plastic surgeon. And he said, I told him what R.R. Robinson was the person that did it, that it would ruin my sinuses if he went any farther. And I've had some sinus problems, but it was worth this. So that's the story of, but that started when I was a little girl. And even though the kids would call me Cherry Nose and make fun of me like that, but I had a mother.
You had a good self-esteem, you should be able to.
So,
Okay, so then you grew up in Washington, and then you tell me
then
about
I
high school.
went over to junior high in St. George, and it was fun, Woodward Junior High. We rode the bus, and we enjoyed doing that. And then from there I went into Dixie High School, and I graduated from Dixie High School, and then I went to Dixie College for 2 years. And my brothers would bring a big load of coal each year when I was going there to pay my tuition. 1 load of coal would pay the tuition at Dixie College. And so I went to school there. And I wanted to go awfully bad to Brigham Young University. And when I graduated from high school, I was the only girl in Washington of that class that went on to Dixie College. There was 3 boys. There was Rulon Iverson and Roy Nielsen and Paul Nielsen. Roy Nielsen and Paul Nielsen. The rest of our friends either got married or went to work. So we were the only ones that went on to college. And so I felt real good about that. But then the summer before I went to college, I went down to Las Vegas because Suzette said, come live with me and get you a job and you can help.
And Suzette was your
Half-sister. And she lived in apartments. There was 4 apartments.
I remember her.
And her husband owned them. He was a railroad man. And I lived with her, and she took me up to the town barbecue because she knew Ed Celiak's. And Ed Celiak, she said, I've got a sister here who likes a work. And he said, well, I'm glad to give her a job. So I worked at the town barbecue. Like I said, it was just a counter, and they had just hamburgers, and they did have one steak dinner. Like the rest of the time, I had to go outside if a car came up and honked. I had to go out and take their order and come and get it. And that's when I met Jack Schofield and Uncle Ralph's brother Dave Forbes. They were the cooks. And so that's where I worked there all that summer. And then toward the end of the summer, Dad started coming in here and Johnny McFadden and getting hamburgers and kidding me. And you know, I kidded back with him and not thinking that he cared a thing about me. But they just come in. And one time he drives up Smarty in that red car and has a girlfriend in it and honks his horn for me to come out and get to wait on him. So I go out, act like I didn't care at all, but I really did care. I hadn't really had a date with him yet, but he had been real nice to me. So I went out and got their order and went and got it and took it back, and I thought, oh, and the girl was a red-headed girl, pretty girl, red hair. I remember that. So anyway, then that was that, and then the next week, and he came in, he practically came in every night because he liked hamburgers before. He worked late up at the office. He'd go home about 10 o'clock or something like that. And then he said to me, he and Johnny they'd come in and say, hello, WB. And I thought, what are you doing? And, you know, they'd laugh, and they called me WB, and I thought, what's that all about? You know, but I took it on the chin and was okay. So Walter said to me, wondered if he could take me, when it was my day off, and I told him, he said, well, I take you? He said, let's go up to Mount Charleston. So I said, okay. So I went up to on my day off, I went to Mount Charleston with him, and it was fun. It's beautiful up there. And then it seemed like he came and he'd say, look, now, if you don't have him to go home with, I'll come and get you. Because Ed Celiak said to me, don't ever walk home. If I'm not here counting the money, and usually he was there, I worked late at night, he would come and count the money out of the register and he'd take me home. He said, but if I'm not here, I don't want you to walk home. Didn't have to walk very far, but he said, the policemen are a lot rather pick you up and take you home than have anything happen. So your dad started coming just about the right time, and he said, I'll take you home. And then he'd say, what time are you getting off tonight? Sometimes it was 2 in the morning, sometimes it was midnight. And so he started setting his alarm, and he'd come up and pick me up and take me home. That's how our love affair started. So when it was time to go to school, I was hesitating because I'd had such a fun summer, and I was going to BYU, and I'd saved my money, and that was the thing I wanted more than anything, but I was falling in love. And I was wondering if, you know, your dad kind of suggested that I like to get married. And I said, well, I got to go to school. And on the other hand, I wanted to get married, but I thought, you know, I'd always been quite practical, and we didn't have a lot of money. So I said, no, I'm going to go to Brigham Young University. I'm going to school. And so I left, and I went up to Brigham Young University. Well, the first summer, though, we just did that, and then I come back the second summer, and that's when we really got going together good. But
what did WB mean?
Oh, I said one day, why do you call me WB? They says, because you're well built. That's what WB was. Like they come in and say, hello, WB. You know, I just, God, why are they calling me that? I had an idea what it meant, you know. Johnny would do it as much as your dad would.
Oh, that's funny.
And anyway, then one time I remember Johnny had a date with us, and Dad said, you can drive my car. You know, it was a brand new convertible. And your dad and I got in the back seat, Johnny and the other girl in the front seat, and we were going out all over down, out there where the railroad was, where they take meals out there, and all of a sudden Johnny got a little too close to a bush with that red car, and your dad thought he was going to scratch it. So your dad said, well, Johnny, you can get the back seat now. I think I better drive. But anyway, Johnny was a very good friend to your dad.
Yeah,
he was Catholic, but very good. And all through the war, his mother kept your dad's name. A candles lighted for your dad while he was gone for the war.
So you went to BYU.
So I went up to BYU, and your dad says, now when you get there, he called me from California. He and his parents went to California. He said, Neola, when you get there, there'll be a package for you. And I said, I haven't got an address to give. He said, just go to the post office and ask for it. It'll be there. So when I got there, I was curious to see what was in the package. I went to the post office, got it. It's the doll I've got downstairs that I have.
Oh, yeah.
Grandma bought one, and he thought it was not cute. He decided to buy me one.
Uh-huh.
So that was the first gift I got. And then while I was going to BYU, Barbara and Gwen and Ruth didn't have boyfriends. And they went, there'd be boys come to our apartment occasionally, but I was the only one that had a boyfriend, really. And so every Friday night, the lady, Mrs. Adams, would call me. We were down the basement. Neola, telephone. Your dad called me every Friday night, long distance, to talk to me. And every time, twice a week, I'd get letters. He didn't send them like other people. It was special delivery, and they'd knock on our door. They'd come down the stairs and knock. Well, the girls just couldn't believe, because they were hunting boyfriends, and then I had this boyfriend that was so attentive. They couldn't believe it. And so then he came up 3 times, I think it was, while I was at BYU, and he never told me when he was coming. He'd bring Johnny, and there was not a red car anywhere like your dad's, and it was bright red. And all of a sudden, I might be coming across the campus or I see that red car go by. Well, I knew he was in town, but he hadn't told me he was coming. So I'd go home and start to try to fix my hair and do things. The next thing I know, that somebody knocking, here was flowers. Then I knew he was. That's the way he came, courted me. And then he'd stay, maybe 2 days or 3 nights and 2 days. They stayed in that Roberts Hotel way down at the end of the Provo. And we'd go up to the, what was the name of it? Rainbow Rendezvous. We'd come up and dance in Salt Lake, and we had to bring Johnny all the way to Salt Lake. There wasn't a Catholic church in Provo.
So had you talked about religion?
Oh, we had talked about religion. Yeah, we had talked about it a lot. And he told me that he had a Book of Mormon, and he was reading it. And he said, "Would you marry me?" And I said, "No, I just really can't marry anybody that isn't Mormon." And then people said, "Now don't do it, just to marry him. Don't, get him to join the church just for you, because that's not the right reason to join the church." But I kept talking to him about it. Of course, Viola had gone with him previously, and he was and he had gone to the Golden Green Balls with Gay Myers and Heinrichsen and all those guys, and so he went with Mormon kids all the time. But he was in Demola or something. I don't know what church.
Service kind of thing.
But anyway, your dad was in the Demola, and anyway, I thought, he said he was studying, and I thought he's sure slow about getting somebody to baptize. I don't even. And then the next thing I knew, when he came for Christmas, he came up for Christmas, and he had my ring, and he also had a nice gift for me. And then it's when he told me he thought he would enlist and go in the service. And I said, well, of course, I knew he wanted to go. He was very patriotic, and I did what I wanted to do when I went to BYU. I went there, and he would have liked to have got married. I just went to BYU. But anyway, I said, well, what will you do? And he said, I'll try to find LDS boys when I get in camp, and see if I, join there. I can't be baptized. I said, so he didn't get baptized, and he went. And then the church came out with special things for servicemen. So I got the special books that they were sending to servicemen, smaller, and I sent him the books and all that, and I kept hoping and praying that he could get baptized over there. But I guess it was so difficult in the war, it would have been a difficult thing to do, because when he was over there, when they were in Italy, there's a family that really liked him. He and 2 other boys would go and eat dinner with him quite often. And he told me how they dried their tomatoes and how they made, stuff with the like spaghetti and that. I also had an apricot tree and a peach tree, and they told the boys they could use that anytime they wanted for their cereal. And Dad said this family really wanted Dad and this other boy to marry their daughters. They, you know,
Mm.
that was the thing they were inviting him for. But anyway, he started in North Africa, and then he went down through Sicily, into Italy, and then over into France, and then into Germany.
That was where he spent his time.
That's where he spent his time.
Was he not in Africa?
He started in Africa.
That's what I thought, yeah.
He sent me home the funniest shoes and perfume and, oh, that, I think you can remember it, that's like stuff you put on dresses, bright stuff, and I don't know what I've ever done with it, but from North Africa.
Yeah, that was fringe, like
Fringe,
wasn't it?
that
Yeah.
fringe he sent me from
Yeah.
over there. And then, of course, I kept thinking, he'd tell me sometime he met with some LDS boys, you know, he'd met with them. So, of course, Mom was fit to be tied that he
I'm
wasn't,
sure she
wasn't
was.
joining the church. And I was too, but I loved him, and I thought, he's better than these guys. These guys here around here go out and drink at the dances and,
Yeah.
you know, come in woozed up. But it was hard for me to forget him. But anyway, when he came home the last of September. He called me from Florida. That's when he came into
Mhm.
Florida. Says, I'm home. It'll take me about 10 days to go up to Salt Lake, you know, Fort Douglas and be. And then he came, then he went home, and then he came right up to our house. And we decided when we were going to get married, and he made an appointment to get baptized. And Uncle Arch took him over to the temple, and he was baptized about a week after he got home
In the St. George
in the
Temple.
St. George Temple. And Arch said he really had a baptism. He said he'd asked them to warm the water, and they said they would, and they went over and it hadn't been warmed.
Mm.
So he was baptized in this cold water,
Yeah.
but he was baptized in the St. George
Oh,
Temple.
that's neat.
So that's kind of our love affair.
And then you married him in
In the 10th of October. And we were married in the chapel in Washington, and we made it as nice as possible. And he didn't want a reception, no way. So I did have about 3 or 4 showers, and then Grandma and Grandpa McCall and Barbara and Ralph came up, and Grandma Ryan and Mr. Ryan came up, and Nellie and Otto. They all came up for the wedding. Then they left us and went on to the parks. They wanted to go up to the parks and spend a few days, and then we left, and your dad had reservations at the El Rancho Hotel.
oh,
We went back, and that's where we stayed overnight, and then went on to California. But the man next door to them, Mrs. Winter's son, was the editor of, I think it was a Review Journal, and you couldn't get into hotels or anything. So he got reservations for us at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, and we spent 8 days there
in Hollywood.
in Hollywood.
How
And the
fun.
Browns entertained us, and we just had a good time.
That's neat. So, Dad then worked as a dispatcher
Yeah, Dad worked as a dispatcher, and
for Union Pacific.
Union Pacific, and we were married the 10th of October, and just before, early in November, we knew we were gonna have a baby. And I didn't wanna tell anybody, we didn't tell things like that, but your dad just couldn't hold it. So Thanksgiving Day at Grandma's house, Dad had made this announcement that we were gonna have a baby. And, of course, then Aunt Barbara got busy as fast as she could, and then she couldn't get pregnant. She had a hard time, they did everything, she couldn't get pregnant. And then I was pregnant with Gary before she still couldn't get pregnant. They did everything, and then finally she got pregnant with Ralph Jr. So,
Tell me about,
my Jewish experience.
well, yeah, tell us about your Jewish experience.
Well, when I went to Las Vegas, they needed teachers, and they asked about me using me, and I just said no. I'd taught school, and I didn't want to teach now. I wanted to just be married and have children, and so that's what I did, and just went along. I did do a little substituting for Mr. Keller. Do you remember him?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he's the one I substitute for all the time, nobody else. And so he was up in the office one day, and the sisterhood ladies walked in, and the rabbi said, "We're looking for a teacher. We'd like to have someone start a private school for us at the temple. And could you recommend anybody?" And Mr. Keller happened to be at the desk. He said, "Well, yes, I could recommend a lady, but I don't know if she'd do it." And they said, "Well, who is it?" And he told them my name and gave them my address and my telephone number. And was I surprised the next day, I guess it was, when the phone rang, and he said, Mrs. McCall, and didn't know his voice, and I said, yeah, this is Rabbi Leibowitz. I would like to talk to you. I thought, you know, I just didn't know anything about Jewish people or anything. And I said, well, what about? And he said, well, the sisterhood and I would like to meet with you. We're considering doing a little school in the temple. You think you could come up? And I said, well, I have to talk to my husband. So when Dad came home, I talked to him. Dad wasn't sure that it was the thing for me to do. But at the time, we were building a house.
You needed the money.
We needed the money, and so anyway, I went up, and they made it so wonderful. They said, you name the price, we'll do anything, but we want just Jewish children. And we've got the sisterhood room, we'll get tables and chairs, and we'll fix it for you. So I went up, and I taught a half a day, and had 12 children, Jewish children. And then by the end of the year, there's more Jewish people that wanted to send their children. So I taught morning and afternoon. Then the next year, there was more, so they said, could you find another teacher? And that's when I put a note in the paper, an advertisement for a teacher. And Mrs. Dial and two or three others come to my place, and I chose Mrs. Dial, and she started teaching with me.
Mrs. Berry taught there.
Well, she didn't teach where we did in the old temple. Then they built a new temple, and they told me they'd build on a wing of rooms for me if I would, if I wanted to come in and tell them what I wanted. So you remember what they
Yeah, I
built
do.
on
It was lovely.
for me, and a playground, and I had them make the toilets down low, you know, the bathroom and everything. And then I hired Mrs. Berry, and I hired Ina Porter, and I hired Marie, and I had Dennis's mother for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I found out one year that I took Gary, he was just 3, and I took him, so it was from that time on that I was expecting a baby, so I thought I better tell him in May, so they have time to find somebody. I said, well, I'm expecting a baby, so you better find somebody for next fall. Oh, please, would you come back? We'll give you 3 months off, could you come back? And I said, well, I don't know, I have to find somebody real good for my baby, or I couldn't do it. So I went home, talked to her dad, and then Grandma Williams, you know how good she was. We talked to Grandma Williams, she said she'd love to do it. So I said, yeah, I'll come back. So they got by for 3 months without me, and when they found out I'd had my baby at the hospital, here they come, 3 of the Jewish women, to see me, and brought me flowers, and handed me a envelope, and it says, here's your baby bonus.
Mm.
And it was
Wow.
$300, and at that time, that was a lot of money.
Yeah, that's neat. They were good
So
to you.
I stayed out January, February, and March, started back in April. And then that's the story for 17 years.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Dad's parents, Grandma and Grandpa.
Well, Grandma and Grandpa McCall were great people. Like I said, you couldn't find better people in the whole world. Even though they weren't belonged to our church, they were just wonderful people. And I used to ask your dad, do they resent the fact you joined the church? Because my mom would have felt bad if I'd have joined your church.
Yeah.
And he said, no. My mom and dad said, his mom especially said, you should both be the same faith if you're going to get married. So they didn't hesitate. And all the while he was in the service, Grandma and Grandpa would send me Christmas presents every year, and they would invite me to come down to their house, and I'd go down and stay a couple of days and go back home again.
They probably liked doing that.
Yeah, and then when Barbara got married, they invited me to come down for the wedding, and I was her best
Maid of honor.
maid of honor, and I stayed with them, and so that's the way it went. So
Now tell me about Grandma lived in Moapa. Was that where she had her kids?
Grandma was a young girl, lived in Moapa,
Mhm.
and her dad was the something to do with the water tanks. He put the water into the train as it come by.
McDonald.
Yeah, Grandpa McDonald. He was over the water business, the trains there, and Grandma went with President Bunker. She dated him because
Oh,
they
she
lived up in the
did?
valley. Oh yeah, she went with Brian Bunker, and
Huh.
of course Grandma was a good lady, you know, and
Oh,
a
I
pretty
know
lady.
she was a good lady.
And I guess Brian Bunker, maybe their folks didn't want him to, but this is a little community, small.
You didn't
So
have much choice.
she went with Brian, and she knew him well. And then Grandpa, he goes off to the war. But Grandpa had married previously at a very young age. I don't think Grandpa was very old at all when he married that first wife.
Well, probably not.
They said they were just grade school sweethearts.
Huh.
And I think he married about like when he's 16 or 17 years
He was
old.
from Texas.
Yes. And then they had this one child whose name was Travis.
Uh-huh.
And then Grandma, great Grandma McCall, had a lot of pride in him. She talked about him a lot, but you never could get Grandma or Grandma McCall to talk about this. Never. I used to ask your dad. He didn't seem to know anything about it.
So Grandma McCall knew this Travis.
Travis, and she talked about Travis
Yeah,
a lot.
I would understand that.
And she, I mean, but it seems that when Grandpa was off working, he went up in the railroad somewhere and she started stepping out on him, the first wife.
Uh-huh.
And that's what caused the thing. And then she kept the little boy, but great Grandma McCall kept track of him. And he come to her house at times and stayed. So there was a connection there. And as you know, we found out that he was 80 years old when he died.
Yeah.
And what his name was. And
It wasn't Travis,
it was Travis.
Yeah, that's
Travis
right. You got
something.
that from Shirley, didn't you?
Shirley got that through the,
Census or something.
yeah, that's what she got from me. So anyway, but Grandpa and Grandma McCall were wonderful people. They were. The stories like Aunt Barb was telling, that was a little side story, but that wasn't Grandma. She was a wonderful lady.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was an interesting story.
Oh, yeah. But she doted on you, Judy. When you got to be a rhythmist, when you played the piano, all those things were so important to Grandma. And when you wanted a certain dress you wanted, I said, well, we just can't afford that. We'll get you a free dress. But Grandma said, no, I'll pay the rest of it. She wanted you to have it. And so she was, and then she was always taking you down to her church,
Oh,
the
I remember
bazaars,
that.
introducing you to her grandchildren,
Yeah, and I remember going to Desert
church.
Inn for Easter brunches.
Uh-huh.
We go see the chickens and the bunnies
Uh-huh.
and those kinds of things. She'd always get me an Easter dress or make me an
Yeah,
Easter dress.
she made you dress after a dress.
Yeah.
The only
So
dress that I ever
was-
made you that I thought was cute was a blue organdy pinafore over a thing, and Grandma just sewed so much that you had more clothes than any kid in the ward.
Yeah.
Because she loved to dress you,
Yeah.
and she did a good job too, but and for instance, when I'd be teaching school down there, she knew I had to go, we used to have dinners, she knew I had to make something. Grandma had it all made at my house when I got home from school.
Oh, how
A
nice.
pie or
What a
2
thoughtful
pies.
person.
Grandma was very thoughtful,
That's
or
right.
even sometimes just for our dinner. Here she'd come with something she'd made for our dinner, knowing that, that I was working. And she used to worry and say, Neola, you ought to have help. You just ought to have help. And I said, Grandma, I can do it. And I did, through her fussing at me all the time. I did get a colored woman to come in once, and it was so awful. I only had her once, and that was it. But Grandma I couldn't say one bad thing,
You
and
couldn't have had a better mother-in-law.
no, I never could have had a better mother-in-law than Grandma McCall. She was always helping us, always doing for us.
Mhm.
So proud of you kids, just absolutely proud. She just,
That's
when
good.
you made the rhythmettes, I thought she would just, she was excited.
Uh-huh.
She just,
Well, let's see. What was probably one of your fond memories of your Las Vegas days?
well, I guess, and I don't know if you remember, we had the apostles at our house for dinner. Do you remember that?
Gilbert Stapley.
Stapley and the other one, the older man, the white-haired, what was his name? He was an apostle too.
I
And he
remember
fell when they were organizing the steak at the steakhouse. He fell down the stairs, and they were really concerned about him. Gosh, what was his name? But anyway, Gay Myers was moving away. Adamses didn't think their house was big enough. They had a small house. And so your dad, and Reams didn't offer. So your dad says, we'll have them for dinner at our house.
Yeah.
So I was teaching. I know I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning, getting everything ready for that dinner. It was so wonderful. And when they got there, what was the one, his name? He was older, white-haired. He said, even though I had turkey dinner and the whole thing, he asked for bread and milk.
Hmm.
And that's what he ate at our house. But they blessed our home.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, they said, would you like us to bless your home? And I said, oh, yeah. So we did have some, that was exciting to have them in our home.
And then Dad was on the school board. That
Dad
was interesting.
Dad was the state clerk for quite a while,
Uh-huh.
and Don was his assistant, and then Dad was ward clerk. I can't remember, but I remember him coming home late at night, and I'd say, my gosh, why are you so late? well, they had a court. It had a
Mhm.
court there, and they had to stay late. But then, and then Dad ran for the school board, and the first time he ran, he didn't make it.
Oh, I didn't remember
He
that.
ran and he didn't make it, but he had made his name, and so the second time he ran, he made it, made it real easy. And so, as you know, he spent almost 7 years
Mhm.
at the school
I was
board.
in school at that time.
Yeah,
I remember things like, I know you worried a lot about polio with us. Polio was a concern of you
oh,
with your
very
children.
much, and you got the drops on your,
I got the drops, and then I got the cubes, and then I got the shot.
yeah, yeah, that was a real concern, and you maybe don't remember us taking you out to see the big flash go off.
Oh, I remember going to
atomic
see
bomb.
the atom bomb. Yeah.
Did you?
Oh, yeah.
And Grandma said, "Oh, don't take her out." But your dad thought you should see it because it
I
was.
saw it.
We went out in the backyard and we saw it out
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, I remember.
Oh,
I very distinctly remember that.
And your dad was very. He knew you had a lot of music ability, and you know when. What was your music teacher's name?
Schaefer?
Oh, Herb, but no, in high school that you played for the.
Oh, Mr.
Yeah, he was a man.
Eddings.
Eddie. But there was another man before him that won.
Schwartz?
Schwartz came and said she needs to go to Reno to that music camp. She's got too much music ability. And then you went, remember?
Uh-huh.
You went to the music camp. Anything music-wise, your dad wanted you to have it, you
Yeah.
know. So you
I
got,
guess I went to Reno twice. To Girls State, I went to Girls State,
Yeah,
and then I went to.
yeah. And then you did a lot, you know, when Dad was president of John C. Fremont. You did a lot.
Uh-huh.
Remember, I've got pictures there, you playing the organ
Yeah,
and your
yeah,
dad. And, yeah.
Well, those are good memories. And then you transferred here. Union Pacific transferred you from Las Vegas. You could either go here or Denver. Was that it?
No, we had to go here, but they only transferred 13 families that were in the offices. And so all the men came up here in April, left us home,
Uh-huh.
as you remember. And then as soon as school was out, and Debbie was out of school, Gary come down in the Volkswagen, he was at BYU, picked me and Debbie up, and all of our furniture was up here. Your dad had put it in the house and everything. And Marie loaned us a rollaway bed, and of course the stove was left there in the fridge, so we didn't have any furniture but a rollaway bed for 2 months.
Oh gosh.
And, you know, the kitchen stuff.
You didn't have to clean anything.
No, but I was still teaching school to the
Yeah,
very end, and
yeah.
Debbie was in school. So Gary come down that little Volkswagen and got me and Debbie, and we came up to our home up here, and your dad had it all the furniture in, all set, ready to go, and then that was I didn't like to leave Las Vegas. I'd had a lot
I'm
of
sure it
good
was hard,
experiences,
yeah.
a lot of good friends.
What
and
year was that, Mom? Do you remember?
Well, Debbie was 8 years old.
And she was born in.
She was born in 59, wasn't she?
Oh, she's 12 years older than I am. I'm 46, so it would be 58 or 59, yeah.
59.
And
I
she
think.
was 8, so it would have been 60.
Gary was born in 49, and she was born in 59.
So 59 and 8, that would make it 67. Right? Was it the year after I got married?
Well, you got married before we left down there,
66,
and
uh-huh,
then we
yeah,
came up.
okay.
Yeah. So that's when we came up here, and I was concerned, but Debbie just fit right in school. She went
She was
right
a good
up there,
age, yeah.
fit right in school, and everybody was good and bountiful, welcomed
Then you
us.
got to be state primary
Well,
president.
when I got here first, they put me in as the guide patrol leader, and I had the guide patrol. I don't know, there's 1
Which is
year.
now the
2 years.
Blazers.
Yeah, the Blazers. And then the next thing, I was asked to be the primary president for the ward. 1 year, or else 2 years, I can't remember how long. I was the ward primary president. I had good counselors, Joanne and what's her name? Wonderful counselors. And then they divided our stake, and they, after I guess I'd been ward president for about 4 years, they divided the stake, and this is something that one night I woke up, and I had this feeling that I was going to be made the state president of the primary. I just came in, and I woke your dad up, and I said, Walter, he said, what? And I said, I just got the feeling they're going to ask me to be the president of the state primary. And I said, it's awful to say that, but it's just come on me tonight.
Mhm.
And I said, please don't say anything. He said, oh, I won't. But I said, I just got this feeling, and I can't get it out of me. So I lay there and didn't sleep the rest of the night till morning. And that day went by, and the next day, and the third day, they called on the telephone and asked Walter and I to come down to the state office. We went down, that he had to say he'd support me.
Right.
So they went down, and that's the only time in my life that I knew something I was gonna be.
Huh.
So they asked me, and I said yes, I would do it, and they asked your dad if he'd support me, and he said yes. And then I took over, and I was 4 years as the state primary president. And then I went out, and I was put into the State Relief Society with Joy, wonderful lady, Joy.
I remember that.
And then she's the one that went in the office and got something taken off and died with, what was
Anaphylactic shock.
No, it was, what's that people used to die with? They get an infection in them.
Oh, I don't know, but she died of it.
Well, she died of that. She went to the doctor's office and she got it there. And they did everything. She was a wonderful state relief psycho. So then I was on her board for 3 or 4 years. Then I was released, and then life just went on.
Yeah. Well, can you think of any questions, Dan? You talked about Christmases a lot. You had good Christmases when you were a child, and I had good ones when I was a child, and it's always meant a lot to you.
Yeah,
and
Christmas
it did
is
to my
always
grandma.
important. And my mom, even though we didn't have a lot of money, if we needed a pair of shoes and we was almost barefoot, we wouldn't get new shoes till Christmas, because she wanted more things for us for Christmas. And she would go shopping all day. She'd wait till the last 2 or 3 days for Christmas. She'd go shopping and come home with all these bundles. She'd put them away, and then I still remember Christmas Eve, she was hunting stuff that she hid.
I inherited that from her.
and she would be hunting and fixing it. She wanted us to have a good Christmas. But I can remember getting after my dad too and saying they wouldn't have anything if you did it. She wouldn't care if they got anything. I can remember fussing at my dad, because my dad didn't. He let her do it all. And of course women do mostly, but I can remember her getting after him and saying, Neola wouldn't get a thing if it wasn't for me. So.
What, if you had to give some advice to even your great-great-grandchildren that will be coming around in 20 years, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would say listen to your parents. I'm so glad I listened to my parents. And get a patriarchal blessing and go by that and read it often, read it a lot. But in my family, I hate to say it, but some of them didn't have much self-esteem. Some of my brothers, my sisters mainly, and I had one brother that didn't have a lot. But for some reason, maybe it was my mother, I don't know, somebody helped me get self-esteem. So that I was sure enough about my smarts. I was always above average in school, and kids was always asking me to help them and to do things. And then when I married your dad, he really lifted my self-esteem. He told me that I could make good things out of mud. He said, you can make anything good. You could make a cake out of mud, Neola, and be good. And then we'd go to the parties that, they used to have a lot of dinners, and he'd say, which one is Neola's? And I'd feel so embarrassed. And I said, Walter, don't ask. If you can't tell, take anybody's food. But he would tell me, when they come to get me to do something, why, he'd say, they're always coming for you. He said, you can do it, Neola. And I'd say, oh, I don't know. He would build me up and say, you can do it. And I was able to do it. But I was grateful for that. Now, where it came from, I think it was first my mother that built me.
Well, do you think you could have come with a little bit of it too?
I think I did. I think my dad had a little. I think my dad had quite a little. My dad was a proud person. And I think that their father might have been more timid and quiet, because I was the noisiest one of Mom's kids. Not noisy, but more aggressive one, I should say.
Aggressive.
I was the most aggressive one of her kids to go after education and the things I wanted.
Right.
And my mom said, you tried hard, and my mom would try to get me the money. Or she'd say some of the others just fooled around in school. They'd get letters back and say they're not doing anything in school, the sister. And so Mom said, I wanted you to have an education because I knew you wanted it and that you would do well. So, but I've always kind of gave a little bit of credit to my dad, because he had quite a bit of self-esteem. He thought he was a pretty good man. And we'd get dressed up. For instance, he wore a toupee. and he'd have gray hair below this brown toupee, but he thought it made him look young, so he wore it. And he'd get bib overalls, and that's what he wore. And if he put on a good shirt and a tie, he thought he was dressed up in bib overalls. And the people would come to our house, he was a great talker. How old are you? First thing he'd ask them, how old are you? And I'd say, Daddy, you're not supposed to ask people how old they are. But he was more aggressive than my mom.
Yeah, yeah.
But on the other hand, too, I have to give the credit to Mom. She's the one that sat there and talked to me and told me, you can do it.
She did.
And you're smart, Neil. Look how the kids copy your stuff. Look what they do. They come here to the house and ask you to help them.
Yeah.
So she gave me self-esteem,
Yeah.
too. But I do believe I was, out of that family, I had as much self-esteem as any of them. Probably more.
Yeah.
So,
Well.
and I had good brothers and sisters. They all were so good to me. And I, like I say, they treated me just the same as they treated each other.
Sure, you were no different.
No different, no half-sister stuff,
Yeah.
not at all. In fact, sometimes I thought my brothers treated me better than they did the other sisters.
Well, you were the youngest too. That makes.
I was the
sometimes a
youngest, and they
difference.
kind of, yeah.
So, well, can you think of any other stories that you'd like to tell, or?
Well, I'm trying to think. Oh, yes, this is a story that probably, if I can tell it right, we used to sell milk at our house, and they had a campground below us there. I don't know if you remember
Yes, I do.
the cabins. People that lived there would come up and buy a quart of milk a night or 2 quarts of milk. And there's some people that lived there by the name of Mr. and Mrs. Marford. And they came into town with a car, and so it's seemingly a lot of money. They lived in the campground down there, and they came up to our place and got 2 quarts of milk every other day or every day, I don't know which. And so, but my mom was a hard-working woman. She was out with the sick people. She didn't have time for parties and things like that. She was just doing this stuff. So the Marfords got in with Uncle Will and Aunt Mary and the other people that were more social than my mother was. And they borrowed money from some of them because they thought they were great people. They loaned them money. And so they'd come up and get milk at our place every night. And one night it was raining real hard, and Mrs. Marford came up and got the milk, and she looked out our kitchen window and she said, well, let's see if I can see my hubby. She kept looking out, and Mom said, well, what's wrong with your hubby? Well, I just wondered if he's down there. It sounded real bizarre. Anyway, she finally left, and it was raining hard. Pretty soon we had a knock at the door, and it was the sheriff. And he said, have you got Mrs. Marford here in your house? My mom said, no, I haven't. She came and got her milk. Well, they said, we need to search your house. So Mom let them go clear through the house. She wasn't through the house. But that lady had borrowed so much money from people, and they wanted to make a getaway that night and go leave town and leave everybody in the lurch. So she came around, and she wasn't in our house then, but she came around, and that little back door, you know, that little room that was added on, wasn't locked. She got in that room, and there she was. They came the second time, and they said, they summoned, saw her coming and getting in your house. So Mom said, I don't know if she's been here. Well, they searched again, they couldn't find her. Well, anyway, they finally found her.
Was she hiding?
She was hiding. And see, she was hiding out at our house because she was friends to the others. They borrowed money from the other people, and all she did from us was buy milk.
Yeah.
She wasn't a friend to Mom. Mom wasn't her friend. Because Mom was a socialite with the others. So anyway, Mom says, Mom just felt terrible them coming searching our house. We were in bed, and I remember pulling the cover off my face to see who I was in bed. And then they were out all night, and they finally found her. She went down through our lots and across that creek and fell in the creek. She had a coat. Somebody had given her a coat. She borrowed a coat, and somebody found her drenching, walking out of that creek, and found her.
Wow.
The next day, they rode them on the rails out of town.
Gosh, that's amazing.
Isn't that a funny story?
Yeah. You used to talk about your mom going to some houses to take stuff she had to get yeast at this house.
Oh, I used to take flour or sugar. Sister Everett made the yeast, and she had one of those big, oh, you've seen it, they put pickles in them.
Uh-huh.
And then she'd have I can just still see that dishcloth, clean dishcloth over the thing. I'd go down with a little bucket we got lard in with a lid on it, and we'd either give, I don't know how Mom would have 2 cups of flour or a cup of sugar, and then she'd pour it out and give it that. And I loved yeast.
You ate yeast.
I drank it, And when I halfway home, I'd take the lid off and drink a little. It would, it was kind of like bitey, and it was kind of like brute beer to me. Well, anyway, I went at least 2 or 3 times a week to Sister Everett's, and that was about 5 blocks from our house
Wow.
to get yeast. And she would empty the flour, if it was flour, if it was sugar, that, and fill my little bucket, put the lid on it, and I'd take it home. That's Mom made bread. And then we had to take turns mixing the bread. And my mom had a big black cape, and I remember we'd put a white dishcloth over the dough, and then a pan, a big round pan. Then Mom would wrap it in that white, big black cape to keep it warm at night. All night long it would rise,
Oh.
wrapped in that big, heavy black cape. Because they would put coal in the stove just before they went to bed, but we only had the kitchen warm, you know.
Yeah.
And then the next morning we'd get up, the bread would be up with that big thing wrapped around it and that much warm. And then and Mom would make it into the loaves. But we took turns, Thor and I, mixing bread.
And she made her soap from her.
Mom used,
rendered her.
yeah, Mom used the lye and pork rinds and I don't know what all she did. And she would had that big black tub that you saw her put clothes in, soap, and then they'd tip it out and it looked like a cake. And then she'd cut it with a big knife into bars. And it smelled absolutely terrible, I
I
thought.
bet it did.
But it sure got the clothes clean because there was lye in it.
Yeah.
And,
Wow. It's
and wash
amazing.
day was always Monday, and that's the day we'd always have white beans for dinner. And it was a Maytag machine. Do you remember the old Maytag we had out there?
The ringer.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
And they would put the white clothes in first, and the next the lightest in. Never changed the water. And the next, finally, it'd be the overalls at the end. And then there was a tub full of white, just water, and then a tub with bluing water. And then we could move that ringer around so that they could go from one tub to the other.
Wow, we sure have it.
And then all day it'd take Mom to wash, and then she'd have to carry the water out of that and down, away from the house. And it was an all-day job.
When did you get an indoor toilet?
Well, I was quite old when we did, because they surprised Mom and put a bathroom in for her.
Oh.
They took her to Santa Clara to visit with her sisters, and then they put in the tub and that. But we would go out and sit and look at the catalog. That was the toilet paper. And we'd tear a piece out of the catalog, and we'd look at the catalog while we were going to the bathroom. And let me tell you, it was cold going out there.
I bet it
We
was.
took a flashlight the last thing before you go to bed. But people also had the big, they called them, big pots.
Chamber pots.
Uh-huh. And then they'd empty it the next morning.
Yeah.
But it was just for urine, that's all,
Yeah.
But that was my life.
Well,
but it was I had a good time.
Yeah, you did.
I loved my life. Even though I had this little thing of the birthmark and the thing that made me feel bad, I guess I did a lot of things and I liked my life. I was always in
You played
plays.
the piano, didn't you, Mom?
I did for a while, But I was always chosen to be in the plays because I could learn fast and I talked loud.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Mutual, that's when I first started going a little bit with boys. After the plays was over, they'd walk us home, to our home, and that was a thing. And then, of course, I got to be Golden Green Ball Queen, and
Which they don't have anymore.
they don't have anymore. And then dancers, I got 2 pictures once when I was a dancer, and I remember borrowing a formal for one of them. I only had one formal, borrowed a formal from somebody else for it. We just didn't have things that didn't matter. It didn't matter. Everybody loaned everybody things, and we just.
You used to talk about making dollhouses out on the pomegranate bushes.
Oh, my dad built me the darling dollhouse, but between the pomegranate bushes is where we would. But he built it under the pomegranate bushes, and I was the only little girl in town. He went over to St. George and got the lumber and came back, made it. Mama had an old piece of linoleum, and we put linoleum on the floor, and then when Gwen had come up, we put a curtain between it, so half of it was her house and the other half was my
Oh, how
house.
fun.
And I had a little stove to this day. I don't know what happened, that darling little stove. And when my dad came from Switzerland, he had the prettiest red vest with real silver buttons. Why my mom let me wear that when I was a little girl, wear it out, it was a beautiful keepsake. I wish she'd kept it. But I wore it all the time because she kept me warm.
Yeah.
But it was pretty red, and it just like Swiss girls, and it had real silver buttons.
Yeah.
Silver buttons on it. So
Well, Mom, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate your sharing some of your life experiences
Well,
with us.
it was fun. Like they asked me to write a note about Vera, something I remember about Vera. I used to go up there. See, her kids are my age,
Right.
and I'd play with the kids. And we were over to Vera's playing, Clark and and I don't think Dilma was, just me and Clark, and McKay, Ella's son. We're all playing together, and all of a sudden me and Clark decided we didn't want to play with McKay anymore, just kid stuff. And we started to run away from him, and we ran all the way home. And by the time we got home, Ella got over there and said, what's going on? But she got there before we did. And when we got home, Vera said, where's McKay? We said, we don't know. She said, well, you were all playing together, now where is he? We didn't know, but we was getting scared. And she said, well, I know what you did. You went and left him. You both just ran away and left him. Now you turn right around and go back there and tell him you're sorry. Well, it took us the longest time to get back there.
And it did.
But it was the first time I was made to say I was sorry. And I had to say I'm sorry, and I remembered that. And I was sure careful I didn't hurt somebody again, because that was a hard
That was
thing.
awful.
It was about two or three blocks from Ella to Vera's house, and me and Clark made it last as long as we could.
Yeah, I'll bet you did.
And,
That's fun.
but anyway,
And Vera, she's still going at 96, is she?
98.
98?
She's still going, and she could probably tell stories like you could believe.
Oh, I'm sure she can.
She was a case. She was always doing funny things.
I know, she was.
She'd go across the street, Mom said, when the people had boys that lived, and they slept on the porch. My brother slept out on the porch all winter. There wasn't enough bedroom. She'd go over and get their pants at night, bring them back, and sew up the bottoms. So when they try to get up in the morning and try to put their legs, she would
That
sit
sounds
in
like
the
that,
lap
Vera.
and see them try to put their legs. They'd look over, they knew it was her. They'd finally look over there, and she ran out on the porch and ha 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 and waved to them.
Oh, Aunt Vera.
But she did. She sewed the bottom of their pants up so they couldn't put their legs through.
Oh, what a lady.
And I remember my mom telling my brothers, get up. The Larson boys have already gone to school. Carrying their cornet, they would be on the horses. They'd ride to school here to St. George on horses with their thing with their trumpets in it. Mom called it cornet. She said, they've already gone to school with their cornet. Get up. You're in bed too long. Then they'd get up. They'd come in either with a thing around them, a quilt or blanket, because they slept out on the front porch because we didn't have enough bedrooms.
Wow.
But we all got along.
How old was your dad when he died, Mom?
I think my dad was 86 or 87.
Yeah, when he died.
And he was fine until when he got older, he'd sit on the porch and yodel. My dad loved to yodel, and he could yodel good. He had a good voice. He'd yodel, and when I'd come home from school when I was younger, he'd already have a problem. My dad was good figuring in his head, like tonnage or stuff like that he would figure out. And before I could hardly get the gate open to go in, he says, come here, Neil, I've got a problem for you. And he'd tell it to me, and I'd say, well, let me get my paper and pencil. Oh, you don't need a paper and pencil. You figure that out in your head. Well, I couldn't do that. So I'd go get a paper and pencil. But he always had a problem. And I think that's one reason I liked math, because my dad just was sort of a tutor. And I don't remember my mother ever reading me a story. She was too busy, but my dad did. My dad told me story after story, Bible stories.
Wow.
And I think the one I liked best of all was Joseph, or else the one he liked to tell best of all
Was Joseph and the color, the coat?
Goat, My dad, he told me more stories because Mom didn't have time. She just left me to do my thing, and all of us do our thing, because besides all the work she had to do, she was helping other people constantly.
Yeah.
But my dad did tell me stories.
That's fun. What's the tape about that?
And he also used to tell me, it made me feel bad, oh, if I could just go back to my beautiful Switzerland just one more time.
Oh.
Just told me that, and I thought when I went there, oh, I can understand why my dad wanted
so
to come
good.
back again.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful.
Yeah. It was a beautiful place. Turning it off.